From humble beginnings of a struggling artist, the Walt Disney Company has ballooned into one of the biggest entertainment platforms in the world, achieving so much in its 100-year span, such as their movies, TV shows, and their theme park attractions. And whatever else it says on Wikipedia? Come on, we all know about Disney by now. But what are the things that you don't know about the company? Maybe they're missing content? Well, let's round up the top 5 lost things from Disney that you have totally never heard of before. Unless you look at the Lost Media Wiki, but I can guarantee you that there's definitely going to be a few things here that are definitely not on the wiki. I can guarantee you that. Just stay tuned. Hey, First one. 1946 would see the release of the most controversial Disney film to date, that being Song of the South, with the film largely being set out within a 19th century plantation, but as to the exact date is a bit blurred, as does it take place before or post-Civil War. If it's the first, then that should mean that all the African Americans seen in the film are slaves, and they don't seem too bothered by it. But during production, it was always intended to take place after 1865, when slavery was abolished, with lines of dialogue even clarifying as such. Although when Donald Raymond prepared the final draft, he removed any such references out. As for that timeless old question, was Walt Disney a racist? Reportedly, he never showed any such discriminations against the black actors of this production or any others. In fact, Walt Disney and James Baskett, who played Uncle Remus in the film, were actually really good friends in real life. He helped the actor during tough times and even got him an Oscar, although it shouldn't be pardoned that Walt Disney had the consultant and the powers to change the script. Penultimately, regardless as to where one stands with the movie, the corporation has just best saw it to make the film completely unavailable, being 35 years now since it was last available within the States. If you want a much more in-depth history about Song of the South, then please feel free to check out my documentary about the feature. Anyhow, back to the Lost Media. Since the film was based on the Chandler books, with tons of tales with Brer Rabbit, Walt Disney proposed the idea to perhaps make a whole series of Uncle Remus stories, although this idea may have been scrapped early on or completely abandoned after the somewhat unstellar reviews of the movie. While of course there were no follow-ups, there's maybe more to see, just hidden in the Disney vault. Emerging online a while back was an early storyboard of Zippity Doodah, where it has some notably crossed out pictures of a sequence that was never seen in the original film, where Uncle Remus is speaking to Sis Possum about an upcoming party.
Appears to me that you was in a powerful bad mood to go to the party.
I ain't going to no party.
But Sis Possum very quickly zones out of the conversation and gets back inside her house. And then suddenly, with no explanation, her house crumbles to the ground. And that was about as much as I could personally gather from the storyboards. With the inclusion of live-action photography from James Baskett, it's more than likely that this was actually filmed, but at the same time it also seems unlikely that this was ever animated, since that Sis Possum is just an X-out sketch. So one can make the presumption that this scene didn't make it too far in production. It was probably eliminated during the rough cut stage, allocating the budget to the scenes that will actually be animated. But what can't be said for certainty if this deleted scene still exists in any form? Of course, an official DVD release could give some clarity, either an inclusion for the scene for the bonus features, or a mention on the audio commentary. But with the current reputation of Song of the South, this doesn't seem likely. During the late 30s, Mickey Mouse was waning in popularity, being largely overshadowed by other Disney cartoons, such as Donald Duck. Walt not wanting his original star to fall to the wayside, second original star, he was preparing a rather expensive and elaborate cartoon to bring new life to Mickey Mouse, which went as far to give a new design to the character. Now of course, as all Disney fans know, this project grew and grew until it became the feature Fantasia, with the feature taking its time in development. The updated Mickey design debuted a year early, in the cartoon short The Pointer. During this era, Walt was still in his prime doing the voice for Mickey, even being directly involved with the shorts, playfully acting out the scenes and scenarios. But for this specific cartoon production, his animators loved his mannerisms, for when Mickey would be confronted by a bear, finding the situation hysterical, that the animators asked if they could perhaps record Walt in the act, to use as reference for the sketches. Mr. Disney was a bit reluctant, but agreed to do so. He was dressed up in baggy clothes and a felt hat. Being a little bit embarrassed, he ensured that the camera was far away, so that he was just a small figure on screen. And to guarantee that he was giving his best performance, he requested that his animators didn't directly look at him. During the recording, he instinctively pointed out that Mickey Mouse was alas about the same size of a child. After this experience, Walt Disney would never repeat anything like this ever again. And mysteriously, years later, the animators were unable to locate the footage, which has yet to have been rediscovered to this day. While there's never been an official explanation, perhaps one could make the guess that Mr. Disney felt that the film had fulfilled its purpose. Walt Disney's first foray into animated features was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first film of its type made in America. The movie was ever so expensive to produce, draining most of the studio's resources, with Walt going as far as to mortgage his house just to finish the picture. It would have been quite a financial and consequential blowback if the film wasn't successful. But as everybody knows now, Snow White was just merely the beginning of a long lineup of other animated films, being the foundation and the bread and butter for the corporation. Walt Disney was asked numerous of times from cinema managers if he was going to do a follow-up to Snow White, although Walt was very disinterested in the concept of any follow-ups, as when he made a sequel to his Three Little Pigs short, he found the final product to be very underwhelming compared to the original. He did briefly dabble with the idea of making a sequel to Snow White, but only in the form of a short cartoon, which would have repurposed the deleted scenes from Snow White, but it ultimately fell through and never went anywhere. And with the exception of The Rescuers Down Under, Disney didn't do any sequels to their animated features. But then in '94, for their Aladdin TV series, they took the first several episodes and combined them into the direct-to-video feature Return of Jafar.
Produced exclusively for video, it's Disney's The Return of Jafar.
With video sales of the pilot doing moderately well, overseen by Disney Toon Studios, were given free access of the back catalogue of the Disney animated features to make sequels. Nearing the mid-2000s, plans were on the way to create two spin-off media franchises, one catering towards girls, which Tinkerbell was a placeholder, while the other one would have pleased the boys, which would have taken advantage of the untouched property of Snow White, which would have focused on the Seven Dwarfs. The crew on board for the project noted that the critique from the other Disney sequels mainly catered towards on how the plots would largely recycle elements from the first movie. Desperate to break out of that mold, the team wanted to create somewhat of a grand story, being the kid version of Lord of the Rings. But they knew that that was going to be a pretty tricky approval from Disney with that kind of grandeur, likely preferring a light-hearted tale, just like the original film. Although they came up with a compromise, that they would make the film a prequel, explaining some of the unanswered questions from the original film, with the plot starting with Dopey and Grumpy at a dwarf village, embarking on an epic quest where they would meet the other five dwarves, with the first act largely comprising of a backstory for the dwarves. Then the second act would go in a rather bleak direction, unfolding elements that would lead to the original. What's their relation with the evil queen, revealing that the magic mirror is actually a trapped wizard, the fate of Snow White's dad revealed to be the skeleton in the original film. Yep, they're definitely not holding back anything for this prequel. And as to why the dwarves decided to settle upon in their little cottage, with each dwarf having their name representing their personality. The plan was that if it did spin off into its own franchise, that for each installment would be introduced to a new dwarf. After 2006, when John Lasseter was hired on as Chief Creative Officer for Disney and Pixar, he cancelled any ongoing Disney animated sequel, but he did give a pardon to the spin-off material, such as Tinkerbell and nearly the Seven Dwarfs prequel. But after an inclusion backstory as to why Dopey doesn't talk was because that he saw his mum being murdered, the project was subsided.
The boys are back.
What do you mean back? I ain't never been nowhere. I've been headlining Disney on Ice for 35 years. I'm huge in France. People love me at Disneyland.
We'll be right back, but first a quick word from our sponsor, which is me. If you've enjoyed this video so far, then please consider subscribing, as I'll continue to document all kinds of missing projects over the years to help get the word out there. And I can also convince my parents that YouTube's a viable career. Anyway, back to the main programme. In 1988, released under the Touchstone Picture banner, was not only the most expensive but also the most ambitious crossover film yet, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Loosely inspired on the novel by Gary K. Wolfe, Who Censored Roger Rabbit? Fun bit of trivia, that's actually the author on the front cover. Before the book was published, it was picked up by Ron W. Miller, CEO of the Disney Corporation at the time, and also Walt Disney's son-in-law, being largely picked up to try something wildly different, as many Disney films during this era were struggling to break even. And a lot of these films' styles and conventions were definitely not that of the conventional Disney mould. Take it as a very experimental decade for the corporation. From there, the film went through 7 years of development, with Spielberg gradually getting involved as a producer and helping Disney to license out other cartoon characters that weren't owned by them, making Roger Rabbit the only time that so many major Hollywood studios negotiated on this magnitude, with directing duties being homed over to Robert Zemeckis. He was just in the midst of pre-production for the Back to the Future sequels, and head animator being supervised by Richard Williams, who mainly took on the job to fund his pet project, The Thief and the Cobbler, remaining to be one of the longest films spent in development, stretching over 31 years. Roger Rabbit domestically was the highest grossing movie of 1988, earning about $156 million. Worldwide, it was just shy of $330 million. With a $17 million budget, it was a hit. And only little over than a year after the film's release, talks of developing a sequel began. And to keep the public's interest while the sequels were developing, Disney and Spielberg had planned for 14 theatrical shorts, starring the titular rabbit.
People want repeats. You watch, there'll be Roger Rabbit 2, Roger Rabbit 3, there'll be Roger Rabbit cartoons. And then everybody's, oh, Roger Rabbit, that's making money, let's have more Roger Rabbits. Well, I only did one Roger Rabbit. For me, I couldn't stand to do another.
Yeah, about that. The planned Roger Rabbit franchise just kind of fizzled out, as Disney's traction was gaining far more successful in the early 90s. With Disney now having more direct avenues at their disposal, a huge collaborative effort like Roger Rabbit, especially with Spielberg having partial ownership over Roger, the concept of the project definitely seemed to be too taxing. There was a final hurrah to get the sequel off the ground in 1998, but head at the company Eisner feared that a follow-up made 10 years later wouldn't bring in much draw, and as far as we know, that was the last major push for a Roger Rabbit sequel. As for those Roger Rabbit shorts, 3 of them were fully made, but the 4th short, called Hair in My Soup, had started the animation process and would have likely been released in '94, but was subsidedly cancelled for when the development of the sequel had somewhat stagnated. Released in 1992 was Walt Disney's Animation's 31st picture, Aladdin, where it co-starred Robin Williams as the genie, with the role being tailor-made just for him. Being appraised for his impressions and improv skills, he recorded a grand total of 14 hours of material.
Alright, how do I look? Like a vampire on a day pass.
Being paid only a fraction than what he usually demands for. He did it due in part because he was a huge Disney fan, wishing to be part of that legacy, but also due in part to give a character for his kids. He agreed to the film, but only if Disney would only use him for 20% of the marketing.
I don't know about you, but that last trailer, I've seen it, you know, fast-cutting, big music, da-da-ba-ba-da.
As he didn't want Aladdin to overshadow his pet project toys, although Disney took this on board rather dubiously, with the genie being the character that was promoted the heaviously. This caused a falling out between Williams and Disney, with the actor refusing to reprise his role as the genie for any other spin-off material.
He's big, he's blue, he's back!
So for those projects, he was replaced by Homer Simpson, or talented voice actor Dan the Man. as for Disney trying to reconcile over the situation, with Eisner going as far to give Williams a Picasso painting. Despite being worth $1 million, it didn't do much to persuade Williams. It wasn't until Disney chief Joe Roth did a public apology that Williams felt comfortable enough to work with Disney yet again.
Including the genie brought to life once again by the one and only Robin Williams.
It's a kinder, gentler genie. Look at this!
Sadly, in 2014, Robin Williams was diagnosed with early Parkinson's. Knowing what was down the road, he felt he didn't need to go on no longer. Robin Williams took it upon himself to end his own life. By the fall of the following year, Disney released their Diamond Edition of Aladdin, which include a special bonus feature called Miss You Robin Williams, Genie's Outtakes, which comprised of unused audio from the Genie, which was strung together by a coffee table interview with both directors, Ron Clements and John Musker, and Eric Goldberg, the lead animator for the Genie. Adding up Robin's soundbites gave us an additional 4 minutes with the character, but that might be all that we'll be hearing from Robin's performance for the time being, as that of his family and the Robin Williams Trust Estate have prohibited his image from being used, which as starting from 2015 will be acted upon for the next 25 years. And even then, we probably still will never get the full 14 hours of material, since being, well, Robin Williams, during the recording he would tend to get sidetracked and he would make 1 or 2 jokes that were a bit too cheeky for Mickey Mouse, with comedian Gilbert Godfrey being guilty of the same thing.
I love the way your foul little mind works.
But hey, let's be thankful, before Robin left far too soon, him and Disney were able to end on good terms. And maybe with that situation and his final wishes, perhaps from that we can learn. He doesn't want his characters milked for all they're worth. Let's be thankful to the performances he gave to us while he was here.
What's your favorite movie you've done?
In terms of just a movie for the sheer joy of it, Aladdin. Animation is there's something so wonderful about a cartoon that you can sit with your child and just laugh like crazy. And especially like, you know, the old Warner Brothers cartoons, and that's what Aladdin was. It's basically a Warner Brothers cartoon in Disney drag.
But you think in 100 years, 200 years' time that your great-great-grandchildren are going to be watching that movie, they're going to be listening?
Oh, yeah, well, watch my movie. And maybe I'll get one of those honorary Academy Awards.
I'd like to thank the Academy.